two kinds of oysters. Basically, in the States, oysters break down into two categories, East Coast and West Coast. I'm leaving Gulf oysters out of this whole equation. That's a whole other animal. Not quite fine enough to go with their champagne. So, my personal opinion. So we have an East Coast oyster. It's called a Malpeque. It's common. It's usually commonly found throughout the States, but it's a good example of what an East Coast oyster is. And then we have a West Coast oyster. It's called a Kusshi. Again, another good example of what a West Coast oyster is. Now, just to kind of show you an East Coast versus the West Coast. So, in front of you have two of each. So we're sharing. A Malpeque is the Malpeque. The East Coast is the larger variety. The shell is usually smoother and typically larger than your West Coast. The West Coast is smaller, and the shell kind of does this little fluted thing, where it's ridged. So that's two easy ways to tell the difference just by looking at them. So your small ones are your West Coast, your large ones are your East Coast. As far as flavor goes, an oyster eats what it's in, which is the ocean. And the ocean changes, all up and down the coast. Obviously, from Atlantic to Pacific, it changes. So the flavor profile between the East and a West Coast is pretty dramatic. And that's not even counting the flavor from a Massachusetts oyster to a Virginia oyster to a Maryland oyster. But in general, your East Coast oysters tend to be a little bit saltier and a little bit muskier is the word that I kind of use to describe it. Umami is something that people generally say with oysters. Oysters are called an aphrodisiac because of their shape, of their look, and as well as their flavor. The mouthfeel is kind of sexy, as it slips down. And then the East Coast oyster has been described as a little bit sweeter and a little bit earthier. So the flavor is, again, not so much of that musky umami, a little bit more succulent and sweet. So what I'm serving these oysters with, like Phil says, they're fine with just champagne. Champagne has enough acidity to kind of cut through that saltiness and that brininess, and essentially what I'm giving you is a mignonette, which is a sauce made with, in this case, citrus and a little bit of vinegar. So, for those of you who, for me, a big oyster is a little bit too much. I need training wheels. So the mignonette is good. No, usually I just slide them right down. Okay. Just kind of give them a little bit of a let it linger for a little bit. Get the flavor. You'll taste the seed. You'll taste the yes. I do sometimes, but I like to play like this. Yes, you can taste the oyster.
So which do you recommend first?
I would start with the small ones first. It's going to be a little bit lighter, and then you can move to the bigger ones. Yeah, if you want to use a little bit of mignonette, it's nice to have as well. If you want to own information. Talk real quick about how to shuck an oyster, so you can tell your friends for next time. So you're talking about the oyster. Basically, all the oysters operate the same way. They have a flat side, which you can see is on top, and they have a curved side. The idea is when you open your oyster, this curved side will act as your bowl. It'll hold the oyster as well as all that juice in there, and that juice is really where all the flavors are. Then also, you'll notice at the top, most oysters are shaped kind of rounded like this. This is a good example here. The top is where the hinge of the oyster is. This is where the shells are connected. This is where you want to get at it. I use this kind of oyster knife. It's got a little bit of a curved tip. This is the easiest one. You'll see some are shorter and have a little bit more pointy tip. They're a little bit more intimidating. So, go with this.
Be damage to your hand?
Damage to your hand, but if you follow these instructions, you'll have no problem.
I need the steel gloves.
The gloves help too. Exactly. If you're gonna be professionally good gloves. So you need some sort of towel, something to hold your oyster in. Fold it over, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the tip of your knife right in this hinge and kind of insert it gently. You'll find a little bit of a crevice. See how it goes right in there? There's a little bit of a notch in there. Once I find that spot, I hold it down with my left. If you're left-handed, you're going to switch this obviously. So hold it down with your left and use your right hand. Apply controlled pressure. So you're pressing in and you're going to turn it slightly. That's going to release the hinge. So that's all I did. I turned it and I released the hinge, and then we're free. The hinge is free. The oyster has a muscle that holds onto the top shell and the bottom shell. That helps it open and close while it's feeding. So you flip your knife over so the curved side is facing down, and you want to slide it right across the top. That's going to release it from that muscle. See, the muscle attaches right here. And then you do the same thing on the bottom. So it's connected on the bottom. So flip your knife back over so the blade points to pointing up. And right underneath of that, you're going to scrape it off. When you shuck an oyster, every time I shuck an oyster, you have to smell it. Sometimes it'll hit you in the face, and if it hits you in the face, then you'll rather know what to do with it. But if you smell it, and it smells clean, it smells like the ocean, not low tide, but it smells like, you know, nice little ocean breeze, and that's what you're looking for. And at this point, you've got it so you can shoot it.
Cheers.
So cheers everyone. Another little thing that I want to one last trick that I wanted to share it with you. You shouldn't be afraid to open a bottle of champagne even if it's only for yourself. Because you know a lot of times you don't have a stopper and you think the bottle's gonna go bad the next day. It's a waste of champagne. This little trick, they call it the housewife's trick, but it actually works. Even if you have just a regular metal spoon, you put it, this one is not going to fit, but you just put it all the way down to the bottle of champagne. What that does, and you put it in a fridge, because metal attracts cold, and it, it has a little bit heavier, so, the air becomes a little bit heavy around the neck because of that metal spoon. So it holds the pressure down, because over here it's a little bit warmer, so it holds the bubbles. So that bottle of champagne can last you for 2 or 3 days after you have never
I don't